Hey everybody, Rich and I had the honor of being interviewed on Dr. Rolls's Vital Plan Network as part of his Cellular Healing Bootcamp series. And we talked about restoring and rebuilding your identity and how healing from Lyme disease is more than just a physical. We're really excited to share this discussion with you, where we get into all the patterns we've learned over the 600 plus interviews we've done so far, and the different types of healing you need to do to overcome chronic Lyme disease. And we even share a little bit about ourselves and the origin story of Tick Bootcamp. This was a live event, and it was such a good discussion that we decided to share it on our podcast. So without further ado, here's Liza Bloss kicking off the interview.
Welcome, friends. Hello. Hello, I am Liza Blass, the community manager of the Vital Plan Network. It is day 17 of the Cellular Healing Bootcamp. Can you believe it? We have made it so far. We've got 4 days left after this. It goes by fast. But if you, wherever you are, you might be on day 5, you might be on day 9, that's okay. Let me know in the chat what day you are on. Let me know if you can hear everything okay. We're so excited to do this conversation today. How lucky are we to have the co-hosts from the Tick Bootcamp podcast, Matt Sabatello and Rich Johannesson, joining us for this very important conversation. Now, if you have seen the day 16 lesson, this is going to be a great compliment. We're going to unpack it more. If you haven't seen it, that's okay. We'll get into it. So why don't I bring on Matt and Rich? Come on stage, please. We can't wait.
Hey, Liza.
Hey
Hey, everybody.
there. Hi.
Liza, nice to see you. Hi, folks. How are you?
Good to see both of you. Good to see both of you. So, for those people who have not yet seen the lesson, which is so empowering, and oh my gosh, buckle up. If you haven't seen it, it is incredible. Lots of whiteboards, lots of material. But I just want to start real quick with you had opened up, Rich, with we see patterns. You both have interviewed over 650 people in the community, which is huge, and doctors as well. Tell us a little bit more about how this pattern recognizing had happened with this, and did both of you see this? Give us a little backstory there.
So I guess the backstory should start, Liza, with how Matt and I came together. Matt is a young man from my community who I had worked with on a political campaign, and then we lost touch with one another, in large part because I'm old and he's young, and we just didn't have anything in common because I'm old and he's young. And about 10 years after we had worked together on a campaign, Matt came back into my office. He was looking for some legal assistance because his employer was about to fire him as a result of Matt's chronic illness, preventing him from performing at the level that he had previously had performed at. It was horrific to see what had happened to Matt. Matt went from being this uber fit, very good looking, very active, articulate, feisty young man to being this very, very sick, unbelievably limited, neurologically impaired person. Although I am a cranky old man, it was so sad to see Matt in that regard. After meeting with Matt, I went home and cried. He was so sick. It was horrific. And how our story ultimately, came to Tick Boot Camp was I had actually gotten bitten by a tick. I didn't have any competent medical assistance. I looked to Matt for some assistance, and although Matt really didn't have any advice for me because he was so sick and really couldn't even help himself, he did actually set up a series of interviews with folks in the Lyme community that I interviewed and asked them for help about how I could protect myself from getting sick. That's how Matt helped me. And at the end of that process, Matt had said to me, what are you going to do now? You see these really kind people who helped you. How are you going to help them? And I said, I don't know, Matt, what do you want to do? And he says, well, why don't we put together a podcast because you had observed during your journey, and my journey was I went to my doctor. My doctor was incompetent. I got my hands on every single book on Lyme disease I could get my hands on and still didn't have an action plan. I then started studying the scholarly materials and I couldn't come up with an action plan. And it was actually the folks in the community who had given me an action plan that I could use so that I wouldn't get sick. And because I had identified that the true experts are the people who had been on the journey, not the researchers, not the authors, not the folks who are working in doctors' offices, but the people who've been on the journey, Matt said, well, why don't we create a platform where the real experts can share their experiences and they can share those experiences with everyone else. So that's how Tick Boot Camp started.
Wow.
And there were two different sets of patterns that I was able to observe. The first set of patterns were I kept seeing the same thing, and Matt kept seeing the same thing with the folks that we were interviewing time and time again. And the second thing I was able to see was the pattern that Matt was using to heal. Because folks who see Matt now have no idea what he was like 5 years ago. They have no idea that Matt was taken out of his workplace in an ambulance because he was having a seizure. They couldn't see Matt, who couldn't get out of bed enough to even pee, in a toilet, that he had to pee in a cup and his parents had to put it into the toilet. They didn't see the Matt who had to be physically assisted into the shower because he couldn't shower. I mean, that's how bad Matt was. And he went from that to now being back to being very healthy again, right?
Wow.
And so watching Matt go through the pattern of healing, and of course watching that in a micro, and then watching the patterns on the macro after interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people, and also interacting with millions of people who are commenting on our social media posts or people who are interacting with us, we started to see the patterns that emerged. So that's how Liza, how we came to see the patterns that we're now sharing with folks in the community.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. It's such a beautiful story, and it actually gives people so much hope, especially how far you've come, Matt. And I'm just curious, before we get into kind of your systems of kind of what happens to our identities. That was really the lesson. If you haven't seen it yet, Rich did this wonderful overview, and we'll give you some highlights still of really what's happening to your identity as you go through this. I'm curious, Matt,
Yeah.
when you were so sick and you're, attempting to do this podcast and working with Rich, you're coming at the situation from a different perspective, right? You're the person who's chronically ill. It's very hard to process things. I mean, you can be so impacted, you know, cognitively too. Did you also see these patterns for yourself the same way Rich did, or is it something like he also kind of pointed out for you? What did you see on your end?
Yeah. So, Liza, that's a good question because a lot of the patterns Rich is talking about, I saw as well. But the most important patterns, I fought him on, even though they were right in front of my face, right? Rich and I would chat offline all the time. And the comment he used to make, and I want to get into this right up front because this can be triggering, but it's such an important lesson. And, I'm not saying that you have to be in perfect mental health to heal, but you have to be open to the fact that Lyme disease is more than a physical illness. It's more than just impacting your body. It impacts your nervous system, your sense of meaning, who you are and an identity. And if you recognize that, you can really get to the best healing possible. So Rich would always tell me that healing is mostly mental. And it used to trigger me. We used to fight all the time. I never want to talk to him. And in the beginning, it caused a lot of strife. But I started to realize that the more he articulated it and refined his message, it was if you don't believe you can heal, you're not going to get better. And that is something I really wholeheartedly believe as the most important message and takeaway as a pattern we've identified on the podcast. If people come on the podcast and say, I'm never going to get better, you don't understand, I have these genetic deficiencies, I am so unique, I can never get better, they're never going to do anything and take the steps to try to heal and try to recover, which means they're never going to make any progress. Now, again, I'm not saying it's all psychological. This is a real physical illness. It's rooted in bacteria, parasites, viruses, you name it. It's real. Your brain gets changed. Your brain chemistry is altered from the bacteria. So this is not psychological wholly, but it is a component that our mindset is a huge part of healing. So once Rich convinced me of that, I started to see that that is truly a pattern, the most common pattern that we observed on the podcast. But it took me quite a while to realize that because I was so triggered by it. And I get it. we're all told that you're crazy. It's all in your head. We're going to put you into a psych ward. There's nothing wrong with you. We've done the $1 million workup. But we have to work past that and work on all parts of our being, mind, body, soul, the spiritual, the psychological, the physical. And if we do that and we keep believing we can get better, we will. And it's never going to be one thing. That's the second part, right? It's never going to be one thing. It's not doxycycline is going to cure you. When you have chronic Lyme, one thing will never do it. And it's not the same for any of us. So, we have to keep trying, and it's a cumulative effect. It's the buildup of all the things we do to build up our immune system, to fight these microbes. And little by little, we're going to see we're getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And when you look back, you're going to realize that we've come a long way. So to me, two biggest things are it's more than just the physical, and we have to believe we can heal. And number two is it's not going to be just one thing, and we have to keep trying to find what's going to work for us.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I mean, that is so true. I know people are completely resonating with that message. And it's so true. And I'm glad you brought that up because it can feel overwhelming to hear this. It can feel triggering, but I mean, once you surrendered to that aspect of the journey, it sounds like things started clicking, and things will get easier. So thank you so much for sharing that. Rich, I was hoping you could also give us an overview of these 3 systems that you provided in the lesson. It would be a great recap for the people who saw the lesson. And if you didn't see the lesson, it's so important. So give us a little overview of what these 3 systems are that are really being impacted by the Lyme journey or the chronic illness journey.
So, Liza, there are 3 pieces that sort of led me to this observation. So the first was if folks do not know from your organization, we consider Dr. Rawls our mentor. And we consider him our mentor because it was actually Unlocking Lyme, which is my favorite Lyme disease book, that gave us the foundation we use to build Tick Boot Camp. We also consider Dr. Rawls our mentor because when we only had 12 episodes under our belt and no one was listening to us, he was kind enough to come onto the podcast and teach us not only how kind he is, but also helped us to understand the frameworks that were the foundation of Unlocking Lyme and the foundation of Tick Boot Camp. And one of the lessons that I had very powerfully learned from Dr. Rawls, both in his book and from our first interview, was that the immune system always has to win the day, right? And what's happening is that the pot is boiling over. And my favorite metaphor from the book was that Lyme disease is not like the wolf at the door, where you're going to shoot the shotgun and hit the wolf. He described it as, I think it was rats in the cupboard, where there were so many going by that you couldn't ultimately shoot them, right? So I had that framework in my head while we were going through the process of doing our work. And as Matt had shared with you, we were having a lot of conversations about belief and getting better. And Matt and I were constantly fighting. And knowing that Matt is a good guy and knowing that I wanted him to get better, knowing that I wanted to see if I could find a way of articulating that message better, I started to study belief. And what I came to understand is I did not know what belief was. And because I did not know what belief was, I was not properly helping Matt to understand what I was trying to articulate to him and trying to help him to understand that there is a part of this that is going to be emotional, that is going to be mindset. So I was struggling with trying to help Matt with that. And I knew that I was falling short, and I knew that I was triggering him, not intentionally, but I was triggering him. So I was missing something. So I was trying to bring together this concept of immunity and immune dysfunction, and now this concept of belief and how they crossed over. And that's how I ultimately, through researching belief and finding a definition of belief from, quite frankly, a course I had taken with Tony Robbins. And Tony Robbins defined belief as a feeling of absolute certainty. And now once I had that understanding of what belief was, and I now had an understanding that belief was not something necessarily, wasn't something you had to have, that we all have belief, that belief is a two-sided coin. So It isn't that you have to have belief to get better, and the implication it was triggering Matt was that he didn't believe, or he didn't believe he could get better, but it was that I was not properly defining belief, and belief actually is a two-sided coin. On the one side of the coin, we have faith, and on the other side of the coin, we have doubt. In both cases, their belief, we always have belief. I was essentially accusing Matt of not having belief. And instinctively, Matt's response to that was, no, I do have belief, because we intuitively know what belief is, but I didn't have the ability to properly articulate it. So once I understood that belief was actually something we always have, we're born with it and we always have it. And the question is really, what kind of belief do we have? Do we have faith or do we have doubt? Now that helped me to understand how this was impacting Matt and how it was impacting the rest of the people in the community. So then the next thing we had to do is we had to define what faith was versus what doubt was, right? And faith, of course, is a belief that it's more likely than not that you'll get the outcome that you want. And doubt is a belief that it's more likely you will get the outcome you do not want. So everybody comes to this community with belief. The question is going to be, do you have faith or do you have doubt? Now, the next pattern that began to emerge was we kept seeing the same false beliefs over and over and over again, right? We kept seeing, and I called them the big three lies in the lesson that I had shared with you. And the first, of course, big lie that we saw in almost every single interview was, you do not look sick. Right? And that would constantly come up and constantly come up and constantly come up, and it would trigger people. And essentially, they were being accused by everyone who they were interacting with of not really being sick, of being a malingerer, because they didn't look sick. The second big lie that we saw in almost every single interview was, it's all in your head. And that would, of course, be something that would be triggering to them from their interaction with their healthcare professionals. And of course, the third big lie that we saw was that you were told, I cannot get better. And there are a lot of different reasons why people say they can't get better. It's because they don't have enough money or whatever that happened to be, but I cannot get better. We kept seeing this happen over and over and over and over and over again, right? And what that was doing was just causing people to have a belief that was really doubt. It was creating all the doubt. And now, so then the next step in exploring this was that I started to study identity. And when I started to study identity, what I started to see was that there were three different types of identity, right? I started doing some research on how you define identity, and I came across the work of Dr. Maya Schank, a brilliant professor. And what she defines identity is as your place in the world, or your purpose, right? And what we started to see was everybody in the Lyme community who were suffering chronic Lyme disease, they were losing their place in the world. They were feeling like they couldn't contribute. They were feeling like they were lost. They were rudderless, right? And I saw that in Matt. Matt was rudderless. He lost his friends. He almost lost his job. He lost everything that he had been. And that was, he lost his place in the world. And then we started to see the other two types of identities, which were now the lie identities and the my identities. And now how that all came together was I went back to the Dr. Rawls argument about it's the immune system that always wins. And when I accepted that as real, I then started to explore whether or not there are more than one type of immune system. Is just a physical immune system, or are we not just physical beings, but also emotional beings and spiritual beings? And if we are physical beings and emotional beings and spiritual beings, then do we have different immune systems? Do we have not just a physical immune system where the pot has boiled over and it's no longer functioning, but do we also have an emotional immune system or a psychological immune system, and has that boiled over and therefore no longer functioning? And then if that is true, do we also have a spiritual immune system, and has that now boiled over? And really, is our loss of identity or a loss of our place really just all of those immune systems boiling over, none of them functioning, and as a result, we're lost? And when we started to look for that pattern, and we explored that pattern with our guests during the course of the podcast, the same pattern developed over and over and over again.
Wow. Wow, that's a lot. But it makes so much sense. I'm going to drop a recap here in the chat so that people can also see what you had talked about, the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual. Immune systems. I had called them systems, but you're calling them immune systems.
Yes.
And that's so interesting. And I'm just genuinely curious. I mean, this totally resonates for me. I saw this in my kids. I saw this in my relationship. I saw that I was triggering them, and had to adjust just like you had done, Rich. But I'm curious, do you see that people who you've interviewed in the Lyme community or people you've interacted with, are they heavier in being affected by one particular of these systems, or are they pretty much like all three buckets, or like what was your
No.
experience, Matt? Tell us a little bit about that and the patterns that you see with these three systems.
So in some cases, you saw people who were just suffering from physical immune dysfunction, and that was it. And generally they would have the fastest path to healing. There were some people who were suffering from physical and emotional immune dysfunction. Their path would be longer, and it would be more difficult for them. And I know Matt certainly was there, because it wasn't until he was able to find emotional, find his emotional healing, that he ultimately healed physically. But in some cases, we have people who have both physical, emotional, and spiritual dysfunction. I think one of the most powerful interviews we had done was with a woman named Margot Gunning. And I urge folks to listen to the interview we did with her. And what she did, she talked about her depersonalization, how she literally, her spirit left her body and she was watching herself drag her body around. Now, she was one of the most powerful examples of spiritual dysfunction, but that isn't the case with everyone. You're gonna, there are a number of different presentations of Lyme, and in some cases it is physical immune dysfunction, some cases physical and emotional, in some cases all three. And obviously, if it's all three, the journey is going to be even more challenging.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What about you, Matt? Tell us a little bit more about your experience with these immune systems.
Yeah. So when I first got sick, if you talk to me, I would say it was 100% physical and nothing else, because I was so triggered and didn't want to see that it was far more. But for me personally, it was all three equally. And, on the spiritual side, I didn't really understand it. But, when you think about meaning and connection, right? To me, spiritual is your meaning and your connection. My meaning, my identity, who I was as a family member, as a friend, as a significant other, as an employer, all those things were gone because I couldn't communicate. I had no cognitive ability to speak or socialize or contribute in any kind of way to any relationship. So I felt like I lost all of my meaning and all of my connections, and I was alone, and I felt very lonely. And that's something that you really have to think about and try to work through. And I think therapy is a great tool for everybody going through this journey. And again, not because it's in your head and not because you're crazy, because who wouldn't have issues with those things when you're so unwell physically? And I think some of us are just impacted more greatly than others. But for me, I certainly was impacted on the spiritual side. My meaning in life and my connections in life were gone compared to where they were a short period before getting sick. When it comes to, the psychological side, I was so adamant that I was fine psychologically, but I wasn't. I had this anxiety that I never had before. And I had this, sense of this doom and depression that I never had before. So, looking back, that's something I had to recognize and work through. But that anxiousness, that depression, and also like I was paralyzed. I was afraid of everything. And I wanted to control everything, but I had no control over anything in my life. And I think that was such a crippling thing. And when you're going through that kind of psychological distress, you're not allowing your body to heal no matter what you're doing, to give it antibiotics, herbs, supplements, you name it. You're holding yourself back, which is why they're all related and need to be addressed together. So, I want to share this because this is really so meaningful in my life. I was invited by Dr. Rolls, after having him on the podcast early on, to be a member of this group that I joined on my lunch hour about the HPA balance. And I had no idea what it was. It was a 1 hour little thing that he did, an exclusive group. And I remember him saying, it gives you a sense of normalcy. That's the best way to describe it. You're just going to feel normal. And you may think your life is normal, but it's not. And no matter who you are, when you take the HPA balance, you're going to feel normal again. I'm like, ooh, I like that. That's not, he made it not scary. So I worked up enough courage despite being so afraid and, just overwhelmed.
Well, Matt, you made me try it
Oh,
first.
yeah, that's true. Rich was my guinea pig. I should share that everything I've ever done, well, not recently, I've done a lot more, in the last couple of years, but early on, I wouldn't do anything unless Rich did it first. He was the guinea pig. So everything we learned from the podcast, Rich would do, and he'd report back. And then I would, if I can work up the courage, I would do it. Right. So same with HPA balance, where, Rich did it. He had a good impact. And then I started trying it. And I'll tell you, within a few days, I couldn't believe the difference it had with my nervous system, my fear, my anxiety, this sense of gloom. And I saw a glimmer of my old self. And that gave me enough to start moving forward and doing a little bit more to try to heal and get out of that paralyzed state. So, I have it in front of me, the HPA balance, right? I take it every day, still to this day. Every single day I take this, 5 years now and counting.
Me
And
too.
this was a tool that allowed me to have the courage to move on to the antimicrobials, which scared the crap out of me because I didn't want to herx. And I was already in so much pain and agony. I was afraid to herx. But that opened up my mind enough to be able to try new things, which now is obviously the third system, which is the physical, which I think everybody can relate to. That's the fatigue, the pain, the neurological stuff, the cardiological stuff. I mean, Rich talked about it, seizures. I mean, I was having hallucinations. I couldn't move my legs, just twitches, tremors, you name it, right? So all those things were there and I had to work towards them. And I remember, because I think it was maybe a month or so of the HPA balance, I bought the Restore Kit, which is what it was called then. I think now it's called the, what is it, Restore 180?
Yeah. So the original Restore Kit, which I've done too, and my kids did, that was Dr. Rawls's original protocol. And so just as you're explaining this, Matt, in your experience, this is one of the reasons why Dr. Rawls retooled his program and put calming the nervous system up front with HPA balance, along with a very effective yet gentle antimicrobial, which is Biome Boost, and working your way up to the original Restore Kit to give people confidence and to make it structured. So you kind of maybe were the guinea pig for his restructuring, because he does believe that and you had mentioned it, when your nervous system is in a calmer place, you respond better to all the things, to the diet, to detoxing, to stronger antimicrobials. And so just as you had explained too, I've heard things with HPA balance being in phase 1 that it kind of gives you more emotional bandwidth. These very subtle things that are so important when you're trying to restore your health. Right?
Yeah.
Having that bandwidth. So didn't mean to cut you off, but yes,
No.
It's still, we still use it and we still love the original Restore Kit, and it's now phase 3.
Yeah. And I'll say that, this is in alignment with my comments earlier, where I believe it's never going to be one thing. I don't think you can just take Japanese knotweed and heal from Lyme disease, because it's never just Borrelia burgdorferi. It's so many other things. If you're chronically ill, I think most experts would agree it's a plethora of things keeping you sick, and even reactivated viruses because you're so compromised, like EBV and things like that. So the approach that we took on the physical side was, again, following Dr. Rawls's model, because we were, fanboys, and, who's our mentor. I started one by one, taking one capsule, the daily multi-plus, right? And that's just your basic vitamins. Started with that. Then the adaptogen recovery, which is great because these are more on the nervous system side as well, which basically supplement, no pun intended, or enhance the HPA balance effect to kind of calm the nervous system, which really worked well as an added boost. And then the mitochondrial support to really boost your cellular health, because Rawls is all about cellular health. And that's a really important component, because our mitochondria become so dysfunctional, and we have to really help the cells at that level, because at the cellular level, everything above that, all of your organs, your tissues, et cetera, are all going to be as healthy as your cells. So that's a really important factor. And the one that scared me the most, which was the advanced biotic, which was the antimicrobial bottle, which is really a broad spectrum, I'll call it herbal, antiviral, antimicrobial, antiparasitic, et cetera. This really helped knock down the microbes. And I had a baby into it. It took me, I think, about a month or two to get to the full dose. But after 10 months of that, I was a different person. So I did need, just for, full disclosure, I needed a little bit more from the psychological and the nervous system side, and Rawls kind of consulted on this. And we were interviewing a lot of doctors. Like we had an herbalist, Dr. McRitchie from the UK on, and she is a part of the Napier's Clinic. And I bought them from her, and they're honestly very affordable. These are smaller, but they're big bottles. These two bottles, it's one is ashwagandha and one is passion flower. And if I feel extra overwhelmed and I feel extra stressed or anxious, I'll just take a tincture of that and some water, and it brings me right down. And it's something I do as needed if I feel overstimulated or over anxious or whatever it might be, or just stressed. And those are great tools on top of the HPA balance. But I really believe for me, the psychological, the nervous system was something I had to work on first to then be able to address the physical. So to Rich's point, all three are super critical. And I think all of us have varying degrees of what, is more important than another. But for me, it was pretty consistent. All three of them were pretty dysregulated.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing. I love how I mean, now, after all this time, like you had mentioned, if I'm feeling extra stressed, I know how to do this. I mean, that's the whole thing about the long game and the journey is you have to feel safe enough to sit in your body and recognize these things so that you can like troubleshoot your own dance.
Yeah.
And because that's really what's happening in this journey. And so I love that. Like you are so empowered now to be able to do those things. And that's really what Dr. Rawls wants for everybody in the community and everybody who does any type of vital plan, program. It is that's why he really does all the webinars and education. That's why he's always showing up. It's really for you to learn how to deal with this because it's not, it's not a doctor, everyone might be searching for that amazing doctor. It's not a doctor. It's not one herb. It's not one thing. It's a lot of things that come into play just with these three systems too. So it's a more complex situation, but people can figure it out, when they are feeling safe in their bodies too.
Yeah, and I just wanted to address one of the comments because I know this is something that I forgot to mention. I think Karen asked, did I say 10 months? And yes, I did, but I want to be clear that it didn't take 10 months for me to see a change. It took 10 months for me to see a transformational change, right? So what I mean by that is over the course of that 10-month window, I was seeing small gains, little by little by little. So I went from not being able to walk 3 houses after being, a 10-mile runner to being able to, within 10 months, walk and jog many, many miles around the block, which I couldn't do for, almost a decade before the Restore Kit. So, that's the kind of transformation I mean about the 10-month window. But I did see changes little by little, and it wasn't a static uphill journey. There was ups and downs. But when you look back after every couple of weeks, you'd realize, wow, I'm doing things I couldn't do before. And I think that's an important piece to note as well. And I also want to say the other thing that really helps me when it comes to the physical side, a lot of us have these sensitivities to food or certain triggers, and I absolutely love the chlorella by Dr. Rawls, and I probably have dozens of people on it on a daily basis. So on the holidays, I had some pie on Thanksgiving, had some dessert on Christmas, and when I don't eat good, I will make sure I'll take 20 chlorella in the morning, 20 chlorella at night, which is like the max, the max recommendation. Yeah. And if I do that, I just feel even better. And if I don't, I do notice that I'll be more inflamed the next day. So I don't know what it is, if it's all, but there's something about that chlorella. It just allows my body to tolerate, decisions like that. Oh, you had a piece of pie. All right, well, it's not that big of a deal. The chlorella is going to help. So I do think that's another great tool to kind of counter just things, bad decisions with diet, bad decisions with, maybe drinking alcohol, which I don't think anybody should do, candidly, right? But we're all human. And I'm not saying everybody should go have cake, but we're gonna. And if we do, to me, it's a good tool that I use to kind of offset that piece of it.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And you noticing these things and can arm yourself, with making those adjustments, taking the chlorella. Yeah. I love that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what would be some recommendations or suggestions in moving forward. So, these concepts, could be new to some people, and it's something that we have to accept and reflect upon, right? And we're all processing this, but once you kind of recognize maybe, how these three systems are affecting you, what is the next step? Like, what do you work on? What's the roadmap forward? Give us some insight there.
So I think a good first step that we've observed with many of our guests. Actually, let me make this observation. One of the questions that we had asked for the first 400 or 500 episodes of our podcast was, if you could give back your Lyme disease journey, would you give it back? Meaning, if you could erase it, would you erase it? And literally every single person we asked that question to, when they had gotten to the end of the journey, had said, I would not give it back. Literally everyone. So that was another one of the clues that we had. Now, we stopped asking that question because in the comments, people were complaining that we were asking the same questions all the time to everyone else. But we were doing that because we want to explore patterns. But of course, we do have to listen to our community as well. So for the last, say, 100 or 150 episodes, we stopped asking that question. But if you listen to our podcast, the first 500 episodes or so, we asked everyone that question. So that was an important thing for me to consider when looking at this event, right? I mean, it just seems crazy that people would
Yeah.
say they wouldn't give it back, right?
Yeah.
And the reason they all taught us that they wouldn't give it back is because it gave them the opportunity to be a more pure version of themselves. They became a more powerful servant, right? So what was happening with folks is as they were getting through the stresses of this journey, they started to understand more about themselves. We as human beings are adaptive beings, and how we become more aware of who we are, how we become more powerful, how we become stronger is through stress. If you want to have big arms, for example, physically, you do a lot of curls and you put your arms under stress. Well, it's the same thing emotionally and spiritually. It's actually the stress that puts you in a position where you learn more about you and your purpose, right? Now, one of the things that I learned even before we started our podcast is some of the kindest, most giving people I ever met were the people in the Lyme disease community. I get bitten by a tick. I'm freaking out. I don't want to get sick. Matt calls up 30 people, or I should say, he DMs 30 people on Instagram and says, "Hey, will you allow Rich to interview you because he wants to figure out how not to get sick?" And they all say yes.
Yeah.
They all get on the phone with me and they allow me to ask them any question I want. Now, they didn't know me from Adam. They didn't have to say yes. Many of them were still sick and getting better, but they were just the kindest, most giving people that you would ever meet, right? That was part of the way Matt forced me into doing the Tick Bootcamp podcast, our passion project, um, they were such kind people, right? So as it turns out, what we learned was that by the end of the journey, what everyone determined was who they were and who they were supposed to serve. And once you get to that point in your life, once you get to that point in your journey, now life is really a beautiful experience because we are created by our creator to serve other people. And when you go through a horrific journey like Lyme disease and you ultimately get to the other side of it, it puts you in a position where you can now share that with other people. And it will be unbelievably fulfilling. So as surprising as it was to me that we got the same answer over and over and over again, once we saw that it was a shortcut to identity, once you get through all this misery, once you get through all of this pain, and you have a better understanding of who you are and what you were created to do, it becomes really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I've seen some comments in the chat and, people are like, I'm giving it back, so, but I have to say, just for my own personal journey too, it's a transformation. You come out on the other side a completely different person. And I remember, and Lori's like have lost so many years. I mean, I totally feel that there is like this grief, very, very heavy grief of losing time. And I mean, when my kids went through it, it changed me. And then I was like, I know I have this. And then I tested positive too and put myself on the Restore Kit after my kids went through their journey. But it really does change you. And I'm curious, Rich, if I know you have your own journey, but I'm curious if your relationship with Matt made you a better human being, as you had to like kind of, modify because you were triggering him, right? But like through the journey, like did Matt's journey also make you a better person? It really does come full circle. I mean, I was triggering my kids so badly that I feel like, and they came through the other side. They're amazing. They're doing amazing things now. But I do feel like they made me a better mother. Like I wouldn't even be here to serve Dr. Rawls's community the right way if I didn't go through the journey. So I definitely hear it full circle, but that's because I'm on the other side. So I mean, I understand how people are like, that's crazy, but there are still parts like I really can't look at pictures of my children for like a good couple of years. Like I don't want to look at those home movies because they still make me sad, so that I do understand how like you lose time. But what do you think, Matt, when you were going through this at the time? Did you ever think that it would be such a gift to go through this?
Nope, never. I just remember being so afraid and thinking that if I can just stay where I am and not get worse, I can live an okay life, which was such a flawed approach to thinking. But I was so afraid of getting worse because I was getting worse and worse and worse, despite all these doctors and all the drugs under the sun. I just rationalized in my brain, if I can find a doctor to keep me where I'm at, I'll be all right. I won't die. I'll be okay. But that was out of fear, and that was out of all these emotions that were from the psychological component. And I want to stress this again, that these feelings are normal, right? We just had Dr. Proal on last night, who's the scientific researcher out of Mount Sinai Clinic, who's a Cohen Clinic in New York City. And her partner are studying the brain. She's a microbiologist, and her partner is a neuroscientist, and they're studying the brain and how it's different because of Lyme disease. And your brain chemistry is altered from Lyme disease 100% from the disease, right? So you're not crazy, but you have to recognize that. And then once you can work through that, you start to have a different approach. But to answer your question, no, I never thought that I'd get through it and be grateful for the experience, but I truly am, because I look back to where I was when I was quote unquote healthy before getting sick. And I am truly happier now than I was then. And I just have such a better appreciation for my body and what it does for me. And I know I can read my body signals in a way I never even thought of before getting sick, which helps me be healthier. And that's going to help me in, old age as well, to be able to read my body as I start to age. And I think that's an important skill we all need to have that none of us have. So yeah, I mean, I get it. When you're really in the throes of it, you're not thinking this is going to be worthwhile and this is going to be, worth it, but keep fighting. Don't give up, and you're going to get there. Trust me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Liza, you asked me a question I don't think I fully answered, which is what is the path forward, or how did we observe people moving forward with this? And I think the first step that we've observed people making is that they sit with themselves, that they understand that this is a physical disease, that this may also be an emotional disease, and it may also be a spiritual disease, and just sit with yourself and meditate on how this is affecting you physically, how this may also be affecting you emotionally, and how this also may be affecting you spiritually. And then after you're sitting with this and you're sitting with yourself and understanding the different elements of you, recognize that you do have an immune system that will protect you from the germs that you're taking in every single day, and that you want to take some steps to make sure you are supporting that immune system by doing very simple things. Like one of my favorite Lyme hackathon hacks that we had ever was from Dr. Rawls, who said he walked himself to health, right? And
Which triggered me, by the way. That triggered me hard.
It was, but doing simple things like being really careful with your diet, making sure that you're focusing on your sleep, that you are getting movement to the extent that you can, will now support you physically. And now we take the next step up. And now we want to recognize that we also have an emotional immune system, that we are going to be pelted with lies during the course of the day, unhealthy people who are not in a good place. They're just going to say mean things to us, or we may have an experience with our doctor, right? I mean, one of the examples that I had used that we had seen as a pattern in the lesson that I had taught was this experience of having external, internal, and intimate lies that ultimately our emotional immune system will protect us from, and we can walk into a doctor's office with migrating symptoms and have a poorly trained doctor who cannot diagnose us and therefore telling us it's in our head, right? So we have this external person who has status, who we respect, telling us there's nothing wrong with us. That in many cases will now cause a family member, and I've talked about how dads seem to be more open to accepting the what a doctor is saying rather than observing what their children are seeing. But there are all kinds of people who we have intimate relationships with, who we really care about, who are now saying, well, there can't be anything wrong with you. The doctor said there's nothing wrong with you, right? So now we have somebody that we really care about telling us that there's nothing wrong with us. And of course, then we have our own self-talk, which I certainly didn't understand until I started studying that that's really just survival software. And although it sounds like our voice, it's not us. And our own self-talk telling us, well, there's nothing wrong with us, or maybe we're just malingering, or maybe we're just lazy, or maybe we're trying to avoid something, right? So now our emotional immune system is now breaking down because of this traumatic experience that we've had with poorly trained doctors, right? So we need to sit with our emotions, understanding that what triggered means is that we have a binary presentation of our central nervous system. It'll be sympathetic or parasympathetic expression. That if we're in the sympathetic expression, meaning we're triggered into the sympathetic expression of our nervous system, our survival software has now been triggered, and all of our resources are focusing on now the threat. It shuts down our immune system, our physical immune system. So we now have this connection between our emotional and our physical immune system. It's shutting down our gastro system. It's causing our HPA axis, which the HPA balance will help us to manage. It'll be triggering all kinds of stress hormones into our system. And in some cases, such as mine, you get stuck. And you have all these stress hormones going through your system, right? Also now sitting with our spiritual immune system, right? Because we are unique and special creations who are sent here to serve other people. And we have to understand that life is a journey, and Lyme is a part of life's journey for many people, where what we're doing during certainly the early phase of our lives is we're going through the process of discovering our purpose and then preparing for our purpose and ultimately deploying for our purpose, right? And what happens when our spiritual immune system is not protecting us, we become rudderless. We don't believe we're unique and special. We don't believe that we have a purpose. We don't believe we're here to serve anyone. We don't think we can serve anyone. We don't think we can be in interdependent relationships, because they're the only kinds of healthy relationships. We don't need to be dependent or independent, but we're supposed to be interdependent. So what are some of the things we can do to start this process, Liza? Well, Matt and I have talked a lot about this, and what you can start to do is, after sitting with yourself, now determine how you can serve others. And do some things like go to the LymeDisease.org website and
My Lyme data.
fill out the My Lyme Data questionnaire, right? I mean, it is the most comprehensive questionnaire on Lyme disease, and they need as many people as possible. And you can fill out that questionnaire, and now you're beginning to serve, right? You're now taking a first step. Another thing that you can do after doing that is you can join the Center for Lyme Disease Action, right? And you can now become a part of that organization. And even if it's as simple as logging onto a Zoom when they're doing their fly-ins, or helping with many of these little things that you can do even while you're sick, that might be another step that you can take. Another one of the things that we recommend that folks do is to interact with folks in the community in the healthy environment, in a healthy way where you can support other people. Participate in the chat and be supportive of one another, and just start taking little steps. And what will happen is that will empower you, because you are created to serve. And once you start serving, you will continue to become healthier. You'll continue to find your place. And once you find your place, then you'll stop believing the lies and assuming a lie identity, and you'll stop engaging in behaviors where what you're trying to do is just respond to the lies and disprove the lies, but not really be who you are, which is a servant.
I love that. I love that. And I love where you start with sit with it. Sit with it, because a lot of it is kind of learning how to sit in our discomfort. That's a lot of the journey. So sit with it, and then take these little steps. I mean, look, we're all not going to write Unlocking Lyme. Dr. Rawls's purpose, not we're all going to have different purposes, but it's so true. And you don't have to be completely on the other side to start exploring your purpose. I mean, look at you, Matt. How did you decide to do this podcast? You were still in the thick of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, it was because I didn't even want to, I wasn't comfortable speaking, being on camera. And it was very hard for me at first. And thankfully, Rich carried Tick Boot Camp for quite a while, the first year or two of Tick Boot Camp. And, looking back, it was, we'd have a really important guest on, and I get so worked up, I'd make myself sick and I couldn't come. So the really big guest, Rich would be on his own for the first year that we were able to land. And, you start to learn these things over time. But then this is for me, when you asked earlier, I want to add to Rich's answer about a path forward in each of these systems is I learn from everybody, right? So when Rich was touching on the spiritual component about how you can have meaning and connection, when he talked about the Center for Lyme Action, look at Megan Bradshaw. I mean, talk about somebody who was really, in a bad place from Lyme disease. She's had dozens of surgeries. We call her the bionic woman because she has more metal in her than probably bone. Wow. And that woman was on the catwalk with us in New York City at Fashion Week to represent Lyme disease. So, she has her purpose. She's now, spearheading Center for Lyme Action. I mean, what a better example than her? Look at Jesse Rubin, who we've had on the podcast, and through his work at, Generation Lyme and all the meetups they do and everything, that purpose and that meaning in his life helped him propel his life forward to get healing. So there's so many good examples. Sam Perry from Sam Spoons, right? You can go on and on and on. Dan Wagner and Kristen Harris from the Global Lyme Alliance are two other examples of people who got involved in GLA, and you saw their health propel forward because they had meaning and connections with people to then also get guidance, right? Which brings me to the next bucket, which is on the nervous system and the psychological side. There's some great people. And although Rich is my closest friend in the world, and he taught me so much to help me in my healing journey, but there are others who contributed as well that can help everybody listening to this discussion, like Dr. Chris Winfrey when it comes to psychological. And, from the Amen Clinic, we have Dr. Ebony Cornish, who's the head of ILADS now. We have Dr. Brian Plant from the Amen Clinics as well, who can talk about the brain and psychology and the nervous system and how you can overcome that from a Lyme disease standpoint. Alan McDonald can get into the science, and he just recently passed, but his work was leading work about how Lyme impacts the brain so we can understand why we feel the way we feel and work through it. So these are real discussions that are out there. We have over 600 podcasts that can help people understand these things and give them real actionable information to overcome each of these three systems. So hopefully I didn't go on too much. I know we have to do some Q&A, Liza, so I'll stop here.
I do want to do some Q&A, but this is so important. I mean, all the people you mentioned, these are real people who came on the other side, who are not going to trade it in. They're not going to trade in the experience. And we do need to share that message. And there, you do have a purpose. If you listen to the lesson of day 16, Rich, your message is so powerful. You are here to create, and you are here to serve, and you do have a purpose. So, we're all going to get there. And I loved how you really started that with we see patterns, and through these patterns, these are the people who are really increasing their chances to recover, right? And so I think it's such a hopeful message because you are in control of that. You as a person really have so much more control about it than you would ever think. So I appreciate that so much. Okay, go ahead, pop some questions in the chat. I did see one from Karen over in the left. You can put them in the chat, but I think she just wants to know a little bit more about your seizures. What kind of seizures did you have, Matt? And how long did it take to recover from them?
Yeah, the first seizure that I know that I had was when Rich noted I was taken out of work. And, thinking about this, I don't remember a lot, but thankfully, my two closest friends in the workplace, were there. And I remember sitting in my office and just feeling off and not being able to focus. And I was doing a routine computer programming task that should have been easy. And I remember just being confused and, all right, what's going on? Maybe I need to eat, maybe whatever. And my friend walked in, Michelle, and I look over at her and she starts hysterical crying. And now, mind you, she's an EMT. So she's seen people die from gunshots, all kinds of crazy stories. I've known her my whole life, right? So when I see her crying and going, oh my God, you're having a seizure, I get immediately scared. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this girl has seen everything, right? But I didn't even know what was going on. She comes in and tells me your whole body's shaking, you're pale as a ghost, and starts hysterical crying. Calls 911. My friend and still colleague to this day, Anthony walked in, and he was there and with me for the whole time. And then I tried to get up and I couldn't move. So I couldn't get out of my chair. So that's when the seizure just kept going and going and going. And the ambulance came, they took me out in a stretcher up on the third floor across all my colleagues. And it was really, really scary. That was the first major seizure that I know I had. And they had to stop on the way and get me anticonvulsives because they were concerned that it would, really, really traumatizing experience. And, that continued on for probably about a year. And they couldn't identify the root because I didn't know I had Lyme yet at that point. And they didn't know what was going on. They just thought I developed a seizure disorder. They couldn't get it under control. It kept getting worse. And, once I got diagnosed, for me, and this isn't the same for everybody, once I got diagnosed, I had a neurologist who really cared but didn't know Lyme too well. And he put me on 21 days of IV antibiotics. And I'd say about the second week after going off of them, the seizure stopped and I never had another one. But that's my experience. And I know it's not the case for everybody, but that was my experience with seizures and Lyme disease.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, it can be really scary, truly. Here's a good question from Karen. When you're having a really bad day, how do you get yourself back on track and keep the faith?
Yeah. So, and this is going to sound so corny, but honestly, when these things happen, whether it's a Saturday and I'm just not having a good day, or whether it's a work day and I feel overwhelmed, but I'm just sitting there at my desk, I'll just stop what I'm doing. I'll take a deep breath and I'll think of things that I'm grateful for. Take deep, deep breaths and just keep doing that. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. Whatever's going on, I just try to get out of my mind and I'll just be focusing on things I'm grateful for, how far I've come, my family, my friends, all the people I've met through Tick Boot Camp. And you just keep thinking of all these good things. And eventually it will break that cycle. Now, don't get me wrong. There are times where I'm having a rough day and I don't do that and the rough day gets worse. But when I do stop and take that action, it does help break the cycle. And of course, I'll tell you, if it's the emotional side, because maybe you're having a bad pain day and now emotionally you're not doing well, that's where all of the nervous system support comes in, the HPA balance. And I'm telling you, passion flower and ashwagandha, for me, these two tinctures right here are game changing. So whether it's a deep breathing to calm down my nervous system, whether it's the, positivity and appreciative of where I am compared to where I was, plus the tinctures and the HPA balance, those are my go-tos when I'm having a rough day.
I appreciate that so much. And I love that how you're really, you had done some of that breathing and in my head, I was like, sounds like the box breathing from the boot camp. And sometimes you just have to be in a place of acceptance, but I love how gratitude, you had mentioned about like Lyme changes your brain, but so does gratitude. And it's a practice. Nobody's going to be grateful just off the cuff. I mean, some people are, but most people have to practice it, and so gratitude changes your brain too. So, and all the things that you mentioned when you have a really hard day, a lot of those things don't cost extra money. So it's little things that we can do in our day.
So,
Yeah.
Liza, one of the things that I've enjoyed about this journey for me is that I've learned a lot about the brain and I've learned a lot about neuroplasticity. And the beauty of the brain is that it can change negatively, then it can change positively, and we can reform our own brain. And one of the reasons we started and continue Tick Boot Camp is because we wanted people to have the ability to listen to the real experts, people who have been on the journey. And we urge folks to go to our website, look at the faces of the people who are there, look at the description and see who you connect with, and then listen to their story, listen to their journey and see what they did. Because I think what ultimately happens when you get to the other side of this journey is you learn about what tools work for you. And maybe it's box breathing and calming your amygdala with box breathing. Maybe it's not. But there are as many different techniques as there are people, and there are as many different combinations as there are people. And one of the things that's really, I think, cool about our platform is that we've seen all these different permutations and combinations. And by listening to folks who have had success, you can put together your plan so that you can ultimately maintain your health. And when you get to the end of this, you learn more about, more about yourself than you did before. And you bring with you the toolbox, to use the Ali Hilfiger term, you bring with you the toolbox that you need to help you stay healthy so that when you have the bad moments, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, you have a tool that you can reach in and you can pull out. And just as Liza said with the box breathing, or Matt with the gratitude, you'll have the tools that work for you and allow you to remain healthy.
That's a great suggestion. And the good news is you have over 650 interviews of people for you to find a story that resonates with you. I mean, you've covered the whole spectrum. Well, we are just so thankful to both of you, Matt and Rich. This boot camp would not be the same without Tick Boot Camp. Your lesson is so empowering. If you haven't seen their lesson yet, it's day 16. Please check it out. You might even need to watch it twice. It is really so good. And so it's just packed with all the good stuff. And I'm going to also go ahead and drop a link here in the chat. If I know we talked a tiny bit about just Restore 180, if you are interested in kind of workshopping this and having a conversation with us, we are going to be having a discovery group call. All are welcomed. We appreciate you. And gosh, Matt and Rich, thank you for all that you do. Thank you for your service. Thank you for all the contributions you continue to make in the community. You really change lives, both of you.